Ta-da! All right, for those of you just joining us, or for those of you that have been sticking around, no, you didn't miss an episode. I just did a lot of work off camera. I spared you all the pain of watching me try to route and try to reroute and figure out where everything goes. You know, all of this mess is not unique to this car. This is just what you should be used to working on by now on any modern car. Got quite a bit done. I'm not going to sit here and just list everything. Got our up pipe on and everything. I just got to put the throttle body. The only thing missing right here is the throttle body and then a rubber coupler, and then plugging in a throttle body. You can see everything else. There's our oil cooler, water pump, all that good stuff. And that's the connector for the NOx sensor, little thing, just coolant hoses going everywhere. We'll get to this and that here in a minute. So just more of the same, guys. Like I said, I figured I'd spare you the pain of all of this mess underneath as well. I'm not going to sit here and try to focus in on every single little connector and how tight some of this stuff is down in there, and just having to take stuff back off, and you know, and then these cassette lines for the coolant and everything. I did clean this up fairly well. Guys, as you can see, the train's cooler where the O-rings are supposed to seal. It's got quite a bit of corrosion. Tried cleaning it up a little bit, so kind of gave up and got a new cooler. So we got our O-ring lubed up on the new cap, the new O-ring. Again, I'm using Silk Glide on all my rubber. Took the O-ring out of the new filter, lubed that up just a little bit. Go ahead and put this back in now. Pop these down in here. So we have a new oil cooler, or new transmission oil cooler. We've only got 3 holes. That holds this thing down. And we're just going to slowly line up our holes to our holes. And just lay it down on top. Look guys, speaker wire. And this for some reason. So what we're looking at is, I'm just going to cut to it. I could rant on and on about this. All right, so what we're looking at, guys, is the connector for our cylinder number 4 coil pack. 4 wires running to it. This red one being 12 volt constant, but this little gray wire here with this nonsense is the 5 volt reference or not the, this is the 5-volt signal wire going to, you have a small amount of voltage controlling a large amount of voltage. So the ECM is using this wire to tell the coil when to energize, thus creating a spark at your spark plug using the reserve 12 volts. And then one of these is a reference, return, and ground. I don't need to get into that. At some point, the previous owner found a dead miss on number 4. So obviously, I'm sure what they immediately did was swap coils to see if the miss followed. And then that would mean you have a bad coil. It probably didn't. So what they found out was they were not getting a signal on their 5-volt wire. They were not getting a signal from the ECM. So that means somewhere along this this harness, and keeps going all the way into the car, there's a broken wire. What they did was, I haven't even looked on the inside of the car. I'm sure it's the same thing. They just took some good old speaker wire and just hardwired straight to the circuit. That works. Is it a correct repair? No. This wire was just wrapped around and taped up. And I had wondered, this wire was sticking out of here. This was all zip tied up, and this wire, this little loose wire, I'm like, man, this is not factory. I was like, let me just see what's underneath this. And of course, I find this, and then one of the exhaust actuators for number 4, they did some probing and just completely removed the insulation from around the wire for some reason, and then just retaped everything back up, and it just wasn't really even that weatherproofed. So that was kind of sticking out. So I'm going to repair this the right way. In the interest of the circumstances of all of the work we just did to this thing, I am not going to, we have to try to we're trying to break in a rebuilt motor. I am not going to screw around with trying to diagnose and repair a dead miss on number 4 when we're trying to get a ring seated. So I'm going to re-repair this, but using a smaller gauge wire and actually doing I'm not going to call it a proper repair, but a proper temporary repair. This was, this is not it. Did it work? Yes, but that's not a way to do that. I'll probably cut just a little bit farther back. You can see the change in the coloration on this one. I need to go a little deeper on this one, unfortunately. Okay, guys, got my new terminals, or my new non-insulated butt connectors, and then I have my heat shrink staged, ready to go. Alright guys, I went ahead and made this repair. This is actually the second time I did this. Nothing was wrong the first time I did this. I actually got really good footage. But I was kind of weird about the wire I chose to use. It said it was 22 gauge, but man, there was only like 7 copper strands. And the outer insulation was as thick as this brown wire was. But I mean, the outer insulation was this thick, but it had like half the copper strands that this small, like 26, 24 gauge wire did. So I went back and looked at my my wire assortment, and I decided to go with what they're calling a 20 gauge, but this has like 20 copper strain, or like 18 copper strains. I didn't actually count them, but it had more than double the copper strains that were in the blue wire, which would closer match which is actually crammed into this like 24 gauge wire. I mean, so you know, again, the outer insulation isn't as important as, I mean, insulation's important, but it's not as important as the amount of copper you have on the inside. Really, the point of this, the reason we're not using this thick speaker wire is because you can get excessive resistance on this circuit, because this is not circuit is really not designed to carry much load. This is just a 5-volt signal going to this coil. This red wire is your 12 volts going to the coil. So if you have this huge honking speaker wire that's got who knows the ohms, I mean, it's designed to have resistance. I mean, obviously it was working, but this is not. This is one reason why they tell you not to use speaker wire. I mean, for 12 volt stuff, whatever, but when you get down to working with your 5-volt sensors and anything that has to do with CAN or bus or communication, you don't want to use speaker wire. I mean, yeah, it completes the circuit, but it's crap. It's not designed for that at all. You want to try to use the closest match you can to what you're working with. So I did go ahead and I had to pull the connector out of the plug. You've seen me do that before. So I'm gonna put all that back in there and get this tidied up, and we'll be pretty much done this repair. All right, guys. Sorry, we skipped ahead a little bit. Got the wiring repair done. Kind of did the best I could on that. I mean, not really, I guess. Got our signal wire. I still have to run that into the car. Freaking, to excuse the dogs and their squeaky toys. You see, I got most of the wiring done. I still have these two little sensors down here. These are capped off for now. I bought new coils. The reason we're going to be leaving these open is because since this motor's been tore down, when we first crank it, obviously I'm going to have the fuel pump fuse pulled, and I'm going to be cranking this without the plugs in, so there's no load on the bottom end. There'll be some load on the top end just because of the valve train, but I want to wait till we get oil pressure before we try to just fire this thing off. I still have to hook up the oil pressure switches, and I have to get a little elbow, which I have, to set up my manual oil pressure gauge. I'll be running a manual oil pressure gauge just to be 100%. I do plan on getting a gauge and a sending unit for this car, and I'll mount it somewhere in the car. I haven't decided yet how which one I'm going to get, but we will be doing that. This car will have an actual oil pressure gauge. You can see we're not that far off from being done. The exhaust is off. Got the exhaust off. Got the coolant lines ready to go on. They'd be kind of in the way. All right, guys, as you see, we have the exhaust off. What we did, my original plan was to remove the factory catalytic converter and weld in a 200 cell high flow. Problem with that is the car technically would pass a visual, but it still isn't going to pass actual emissions. So at that point, it's like, well, why not just cut it off, gut the cat, weld it back on? You know, a little bit of free power. And I thought about it, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to sell this car, so I'm not going to be a jackass, you know, I'm going to leave that alone. But what I did do, it's kind of a popular mod, I did what's called a pre-cat delete. I still have to blow this out from the other way. It's mostly cleaned out. The pre-cat delete, there's an 800 cell catalytic converter right here, and there's a small 400 cell. Really, it's arguably the only reason this is here is to get the vehicle to like an ultra low emissions standard. It's meant for startup emissions, because when the vehicle first starts up, the first, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, depending on how cold it is, the vehicle's running in an enriching state. So without this here, it takes a while for the main catalyst to get up to temp, for the heater element to get hot enough, just on the O2, the downstream O2 to start reading correctly. So it takes a while for it all to heat up before it's at the core of the catalytic converter is actually converting those gases to less harmful gases and lower NOx emissions and stuff. So again, it's working. The vehicle still retains its compliance with emissions, but it has to be warmed up first. Now that that's missing, the bigger problem with these things is there's such a restriction on the exhaust. It's a fairly noticeable. I mean, you're not talking record-breaking results, but it's definitely a noticeable increase in response, on engine response to delete these. And again, like I say, use the word delete, but the vehicle, on this car, it should not get a check engine light. I don't think it will. If it does, I will make it so it doesn't. But this particular exhaust has a heck of a bottleneck anyway, as far as flow. So, there's not much more of, gutting that would get us a little bit of power. But again, this is a stock build with just a little bit of fun stuff. We're not going crazy. And again, I'm selling this car, so I'm going to leave it up to the next owner to do whatever they want to do. This was more or less for fun. It's free. Basically, what we can expect, this does help peak power ever so slightly. I'm not going to make any claims, not going to get into that. We're not going to talk numbers, but you have your power band, your horsepower curve, your torque curve, reducing that restriction, because the turbocharger, the outlet of the turbocharger sits maybe like 1.5 inches from that where the honeycomb used to exist. So it's a massive restriction on the exhaust, or on the turbo. You have a massive back pressure. So what that does is let the engine breathe up significantly better on the exhaust side. This is, again, we ported the intake out on this. Did not port the exhaust, but we ported out the intake. We're going back with a factory air box anyway. Again, I'm not trying to make it sound like something it isn't, but what that modification does is it more or less shifts your power band to where you're making the same, if not a little bit more power, but sooner, and then it holds that power throughout its power band. And again, you do make slightly more peak power with the pre-cat deleted. It's not exclusive to these cars, these engines. All the manufacturers are running pre-cats for the most part in some form or another. It's for startup emissions. Because again, for the first 5 minutes or so, the way these vehicles are set to run, they're running in an enriching state. They can't pass emissions that way. They have to wait to be there. They have to wait to be warmed up fully, and everything warmed up and heated up to where it's going to convert the gases properly. So again, I'm trying not to sound like a moron here. I don't really care much for that. It works. Somebody else has it figured out. I don't care. I usually just leave it alone unless I'm just replacing the whole exhaust with something else, and then I'm getting the vehicle tuned. Again, we're dealing with a car that I'm just going to sell to somebody, so I'm not going to sell somebody a headache. And get this out of the way so we can get our hole opened up. We can shove the exhaust back up there. Y'all done squeaking?